Nedarim Daf Mem Hey Amid Beis and Daf Mem Vav. Daf Mem Hey Amid Beis, very short Amud, only 3 lines, begins a lengthy Mishnah, which begins the 5th parak, discussing the halacha of what happens when you have two people that are in a partnership and there's an Isser Hana between them. What happens then? So the Mishnah brings 3 machloksim between the Tanakama and Rav Elazar ben Rav Yaakov. The Gemara explains elsewhere that it surrounds the concept of breira. Breira means if we figure out later what was what. So, for example, in this situation, the two partners share a courtyard and they both own the entire courtyard in a partnership. The question is, can we later figure out that one part of it was mine and the other part was yours? And someone who walked around in less than 50% of it could say that the part that I walked in was really mine all along. That's what this machlokas is about, and it's very important to know, because if he could do that, then he could say, I'm not violating the Issa or Hana from you by walking around in the Chatzar because I'm just in my part. But that would rely on Breira. So the Tanakama, who's the Chachamim, they say that it is forbidden for anybody to walk into the chutzner. Either of the partners, if they have an Isser Hana on each other, can't walk into the chutzner because there is no breira, and therefore by walking in the chutzner, you're walking in your own turf, but you're also walking in your partner's turf, and you have an Isser Hana, you can't walk on his land, and therefore it's usher to do that. Or Elazar ben Yaakov says you could, and then it revealed that the part that you're walking on is the part which is yours, using the concept of breira. Now, the Mishnah says further, they cannot place a mill, an oven, or raise chickens in the yard, even without entering it. Now, this is teaching us, because generally when you have two partners, one of them is allowed to do something which really requires permission but doesn't disturb the other. It's not a big deal like these things, because it's considered to be that the other one is mochel. He's mavater on his chatzar and allows his partner to keep these things in there, even though he could really protest against it, but he allows it. However, if you have an Isser Hana, then foregoing a right is giving a Hana. So you can't put these things in the chatzar because by the other person allowing it, he's giving a Hana. By foregoing his right, he's giving a Hana, and there's an Isser Hana. Now, the Mishnah again says halacha, which is pretty much a repetition of the previous case. It says if one of them has an Isser Hana on the other, then you have the same halakas if he could walk in there or not. The Chachamim would say he's not allowed to walk in there, and Elazar ben Yaakov would say he can. This is not a chiddush, the Ran says. This is the same as if they both had an Isser Hana on each other. They're just talking about where one of them. The reason that this is brought here is because there's another halacha which is added, that we force the one who has an Isser Hana on him to sell his share. That's only according to the Rabbanan, that he can't use it. Since he can't use it, we make him sell it. He can't do anything with it. Now, the Mishnah goes on to talk about what if somebody else wants to enter the courtyard, not one of the two partners here. So if you have a third person who has an Isser Hana on one of the partners, he's also to have an offer from one of these two owners. So can he enter the yard, or can he say, I'm entering the rishos of the one who I don't have an Isser Hana? So here you have the same machlokes. Elazar ben Yaakov says he could. He could say, I'm going into the property of the one who I don't have an Isser Hana, and the Chachamim say he can't because there's no breira, and therefore he's entering both of their properties, and therefore that's forbidden. Now, what happens if somebody makes an Isser Hana, someone has to have enough from someone else, and that person owned the bathhouse or the olive press in the city? So he can't use the bathhouse or the olive press, but the Mishnah says if that person rents it out, so can he use it now? So that depends if the owner, the landlord, still has certain rights in it. If he has certain rights in it, then it's still considered to be that he owns it in partnership, and it would be usher for the person with an Isser Hana to use it. If he has no rights in it, then you can't make an Isser Hana, and there is no Hana from him, and therefore that would be okay. Now, somebody says, I make an Isser Hana on someone's house, I'm not going to walk into his house, I'm not going to walk into his field, or I'm not going to buy it from him, and then that person sells it, or he dies and it transfers property, so now it is mutter. The Isser no longer applies. That is if he said, your house, your field, because it's no longer your house, your field. However, if he said, this house, this field, then it applies even after it leaves the possession of the person who he made the original Isser Hana for the field or house on. Now begin the Gemara. First, the Gemara wants to know what is the case. Why did these two partners, have an Isser Hana? They each Assered Hana themselves. They said, I am not having enough from you. Or they Assered Hana on each other. They said, you're not having enough from me. Now, the Gemara has a possibility that this Mishnah, the Rabbanan only say that they're each Asser to go in if they each were negligent. They each said, I am not having enough from you. Then, as a way of punishing them for their inappropriate making of a neder, we say you can't go into this chutzner at all. However, if the other one made asar, and therefore, if each one said, you can't have enough from me, so then each one, there's nothing really he could do about the fact that he has an Isser Hana on himself, so maybe we would allow them to go in. Maybe the Machlokas is not really over Breira, Yesh Breira, Ein Breira, and maybe the Machlokas is really about punishing the guy for making for an inappropriate neder. So Gemara wants to resolve it from the language of the next case in the Mishnah, where it says that if one person has a neder, not both of them, we had the same machlokes. So the language that's used is muder hana, and that implies that the other person made your son, and he said you can't have hana. So that would seem to say that the chachamim, even in that case, chachamim asked him to go in, even though it wasn't his choice. So the Gemara says no, just change the wording. It couldn't be muder hana, make it nader hana, and then you don't have a raya. And it's logical to change the wording because we said that we force him to sell his chelek. Now, if the other person made the Isser on him, why would we force him to sell his chelek? He didn't do anything wrong. Obviously, it makes sense that we're referring to where he's the one who made the neder and not the other guy. Next, the Gemara has another question. Is this machlokes in a case where it's a large chutzner or a small chutzner? Now, in the halachos of partnerships and chatzeros, we define it as two categories. Yesh b'kedei chaluka and ein b'kedei chaluka. Yesh b'kedei chaluka means there is at least 8 square amos in the chutzner, and that it's possible for either one to force a split. As long as there would be a minimum of 4 square amos each, we would allow a split to be forced. Ein b'kedei chaluka means it's too small, and therefore neither of them could force a split. So the Gemara wants to say, maybe the whole machlokus is in a case where it's large enough to force a split, because there's another solution. However, if it's too small to force a split, there's no solution. There's no other way to get out of this. Everybody would agree to Rav Elazar ben Yaakov. The Chachamim would agree that it's mutter. So the Gemara says this can't be true because the shul you can't force a split, and we have a brisa that says, and the Mishnah itself implies that any part of the city that they both need, which includes the shul, you can't force them to split, and the same Isser applies. So obviously, even though the same machlokas applies. So obviously, even though you can't force a split, the same machlokas applies. So the Gemara therefore wants to take a 180-degree turn here and wants to say, okay, maybe the only machlokas is in a case where it's too small and you can't force a split. But if it's large enough to force a split, maybe Rav Elazar ben Yaakov would agree to the chachamim that you tell them not going to make it mutter. You have to go ahead and split it. Now the Gemara does not reject that. The Gemara says Rav Huna says the halacha ultimately is like Rav Elazar ben Yaakov, and Rav Elazar also says the halacha is like Rav Elazar ben Yaakov. Now the Gemara refers briefly to the next line in the Mishnah where we saw that if the original owner of the bathhouse or whatever facility it is made an Isser Hana and he still has a share in the bathhouse, what is the size share, that the size percentage that he needs to have in order to make it still considered to be his property partly, and the person who has an Isser Hana from him can't use it. So the Gemara has a machlokas. Rav Nachman says it has to be 50%, a third, or a quarter, at least 25%. If he has less of a share than that of the profits of the bathhouse, that's not considered significant enough to aser the person who has enough from him from using the bathhouse. Abai says any percentage, even less than that. As long as he gets a percentage of the profit, he's still considered to be a part owner. The only situation in which it's mutter is if he gets a fixed rate, he gets paid a certain amount per time, nothing to do with profits, he doesn't get a percentage of earnings, then it's not considered like he's in ownership in the bathhouse at all. He's only paid for it. He does not have a controlling stake in it, and therefore the person who has an Isser Hana from him is allowed to use it.